On today's show, when did it start to break down between Nico Harrison, the Mavericks, and Luka Doncic? He was at one point the only thing they ever thought about. Tim McMahon shares his experience from his new book, The Wonder Boy. On today's Locked On Mavs.
I'm going to get a city like that.
Dogs, all of us, all five.
You are Locked On Mavs.
Great,
Your daily Dallas Mavericks podcast.
No one's dying.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Still can't leave me alone.
Your team every day.
Gotta be born with a dog blood.
And welcome. You are locked on to the Dallas Mavericks, your team every day. My name is Nick Angstadt, media member covering the Dallas Mavericks for 10 years. Thanks for being an everydayer, making Locked On Mavs your first listen. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use that code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Joining me, as always, co-host, media member, covering the Dallas Mavericks alongside me for 10 years, the Wonder Boy blogger, the One More Thing King. What you got for me, Isaac Harris?
Yeah, we're going to talk about something we haven't talked about in a long time. Luka Doncic and the trade.
We've spent almost no time on this. We wanted to give it its due.
I'm excited. This interview and podcast has been due for a while. We literally got Tim McMahon's new book, The Wonder Boy. We got this book in early December as an advance copy and read through this thing. And it was, I get it. There's a lot of feelings post-trade. But for any diehard Mavs fans, I feel like it's a must-read because you get a lot of other Mavs stuff about Rick Carlisle, the front office, the changes, Dennis Smith Jr. There's just so many different stories throughout it that as a Mavs fan, you wouldn't feel like you know everything about your team. And yeah, I can't recommend the book enough.
There's a lot in there. We're going to get into how Luka's conditioning, it came up before the trade. There's a lot of things. There's executives that have told Tim McMahon, I can understand wanting to be out of the Luka business. What did they mean by that? We also talk about the change in culture and why. What did Nico mean by he wanted to change the culture and then Luka was not part of that culture anymore? We talk about a bunch of other things, including stick around for the end when Tim McMahon, he dedicated this book to a Luka, and you gotta stick around to hear what he meant by that. So I
also want to say this. He spent one more thing. I remember the first time Tim mentioned to us that he was working on this book. Yeah. And I mean, we're talking a couple years ago, and he traveled to Slovenia to learn more about Luka and upbringing and all the stuff. Obviously, he has stories for days and stuff that you might know the bigger picture story of. But then you get a lot of the details or direct quotes from guys like Rick Carlisle that happens behind the scenes. And there were a few moments I was like, oh, okay, I didn't know that little thing was said or this happened here and there. I knew the bigger picture, but not the details. So, yeah, go pick it up.
That's journalism, and that's what he does. And so let's talk to the journalist covering the Dallas Mavericks for a long time, Tim McMahon himself from ESPN.
All right, here he is, the one and only Tim McMahon, Ban McMahon. Tim, we hyped up your book before we hit record. One, I just want to say how much I really enjoyed the book. I think even for people who are kind of like tired of like the Luka talk, there's so many Mavs nuggets in there just over the past 6-7 years, even beyond that. And I loved it. I love the Dirk passing the torch to Luka. I loved a lot of the DSJ Rick stuff. Some good Rick Carlisle stories.
Not you, Nick.
Brought back some memories there.
But no,
my back started hurting. I just started feeling it, and I don't know. I was feeling sick.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff. Obviously, you can buy the book on Amazon. But let's start here. Luka famously said in a post game, he said to you always seem to be the first one to put some bad stuff out about me. And there was even a blank McMahon chant.
I heard
in the protest. We were joking about it there inside the arena
every day. We joking about it every day.
I just like zooming out a little bit. How did you become like part of the story?
First, howdy, partners. Let me be polite. Second, I do really appreciate you guys having me on and taking the time to read the book and the nice things that you have to say about it. And look, man, like as a journalist, it's not our job to be part of the story. It's not, certainly it should not be the goal. Now, when the guy confronts you, you can't just shrivel up. And look, there was the last time Luka confronted me was when he got the Modelo guzzling Devin Booker fan booted for telling him to get his ass on a treadmill, right? And like the guy was literally sitting 2 rows behind press row, and I don't know if he just saw my tweet or whatever, but like multiple people on press row reported that. And also, even if I was the only one, I'm sorry, it's a story when an MVP candidate to face the franchise, one of the top tier superstars in the league, is melting down during a game. And it was kind of a buildup during that game. And he's melting down during a game to the point where he stops during play to look across the court to the tunnel where the Mavs chief of security is and points the fan out and says, get him out, and gets the fan tossed. Like, that's going to be a story. The other times that I can think of that he called me out, you could say, or, we had, confrontation is too strong. We had tense moments in a press conference setting. One was right after the tank, the tank year, during his exit interview, when I had reported that the fear within the Mavericks organization was that if they didn't get that ship turned around, Luka could ultimately request a trade as soon as the next summer. Now, I understand Luka saying, hey, I never said that. And that's where, you get into the semantics of, I never said that he did say that, but that absolutely was the fear within the organization. Also, an appropriate fear. The guy was a freaking MVP candidate. They just missed the playoffs. If they couldn't get the ship straight the next year, say they missed the playoffs again last year, well, damn, how could he not have those kind of a thoughts? And then the other one was when I reported that, he was pushing hard in the front office for them to upgrade right before the Kyrie trade, obviously in the wake of them bungling the Brunson situation. And the news there wasn't that he thought the roster needed to be upgraded. Like, dude, you have eyeballs. Anybody who had, who bought a ticket or turned on the TV knew that. The news was that for the first time in Luka's career, he was involving himself in those front office discussions. But again, he didn't like that perception. Cuban, that was when Cuban hit me up and was like, he tried to get me to issue a retraction. I'm like, no, it's true. I'm not retracting what's true. I said, if you want to say something on the record, I'll report it. And that's when he gave me the Tim McMahon got it dead wrong thing, and talked about how Luka had never, I forgot all the words, basically never asked, requested, demanded any kind of upgrades. And then I said, okay, so I tweet that out, and he said, hold on, did you see an end of a quotation? I'm not done yet. And then he went to tell me how Nico and Luka talk every single day, and he's on board with everything that they're doing. I'm like, well, cool. You just contradicted yourself, but whatever. Anyways, greater point. Sometimes, to me, I've said this a lot lately. If I'm fair, if I'm accurate, if I'm putting things in the right context, and people don't like the reporting, okay, I can live with that. And if I'm not, then I would prefer, and I told Luka this like a week after the little Booker fan thing, I would prefer to have those conversations behind the scenes where we can talk it out. But if he wants to call me out in a press conference, that's his prerogative. And he's not the first guy to do it. Probably won't be the last.
Coming up, at some point, things changed between Nico Harrison, the Dallas Mavericks, and Luka Doncic to make all this go away and send Luka off to the Lakers. When did it change? We'll talk about that and more with Tim McMahon coming up. Today's episode of Locked On Mavs brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use that code LOCKEDONNBA to get $20 off your first purchase. I'm using these because this weekend I'm going to go see the Rangers. It's opening weekend, and we've got to go see the hopefully two-time champion Texas Rangers, according to Slightly. You can do all kinds of great things with Game Time. The reason why I used it to get my tickets is because they have Game Time picks. It filters out all the fluff, shows you only the best deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time scrolling and going through a whole bunch of things and searching. I'm gonna admit, Game Time, I'm sorry. I went and checked a bunch of other sites I did. I went through and I did. You had done the work for me, and I went back and checked it all. I didn't trust you, Game Time. I'm sorry. I should have, because I ended up coming back to Game Time anyway, because they have super deals. They can even the Game Time pick will highlight super deals, giving you the best bang for your buck. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use that code LOCKEDONNBA to get $20 off your first purchase. Could be Rangers tickets, Stars tickets, theater, comedy, concerts, anything else you want to. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem that code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time.
Shut it down! Let's go home!
This whole concept of the Mavericks trying to appease Luka, keep him happy. It's the whole game that teams play with a superstar forever. You mentioned in the book that nothing mattered more to Dallas than the comfort of Luka Doncic. When did that start to change for the Mavs?
I would say certainly going into this fall. And I really think if you want to pinpoint a precise time when it was no longer the top organizational priority, you'd have to go back to when Mark Cuban sold the majority control of the team. And I really don't know. I know Cuban has had some online back and forth and made some comments recently, basically implying that a gentleman's agreement wasn't held up by Patrick Dumont. So maybe Cuban really thought he was going to get his billions and keep his toy. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if he was flat lying. I don't know if he was trying to speak something into existence. What I know is as soon as the deal was done, Cuban no longer had control. And then Nico, being Nico's really good at the corporate game. Nico managed up, and Nico had a good trade deadline last year. Certainly, that bought him some credibility with Dumont. But yeah, Nico, it became like Nico was the guy in charge of all basketball operations. And for a variety of reasons, coming off of Luka being the Pravi MVP. I mean, the Mavericks just couldn't believe he won the MVP last year. Pravi MVP, 34, 10, and 9, led the league in scoring, led the league in total minutes, including playoffs and regular season. Took this team to the finals, led the postseason, and points, rebounds, assists, steals, minutes, never been done before. Pretty impressive season. And at some point on the heels of that, Nico decided that they probably need to move on from the Luka Doncic business. And certainly there were a lot of things that led up to it. The calf strain, which the Mavericks did not report accurately. There was a contusion and a strain, the strain obviously being more concerning, that happened just before training camp. And then, Luka, hey, people get mad at me for saying it, but it's true. The man can pack on pounds in a heartbeat. He can,
Can I say, I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. You've been reporting about that for so long, and I like the conditioning stuff and some of the backlash and stuff post trade of now this conditioning stuff is getting thrown out there. Right. I'm like, no, this has been known around the league, been known locally, and been known from Tim McMahon, who you probably held back some stories too that you've heard.
Of course,
report on.
Yeah,
but you've been reporting on it for a while. So that anyway, I just wanted to.
And you guys have read the book, the 18 chapters that are in the early editions. Those aren't touched post trade. There is that last chapter obviously was written after the trade.
Listen,
but obviously
got this book from you in early December. So
yeah, you can double check me.
Yeah.
But my point is hey, that stuff is addressed throughout the book, and I think the book there's a lot more about what an unbelievable talent this guy is than the flaws, but the flaws are as apparent as his talent. And there's two main flaws. There's the conditioning, and there's the petulance that can show up, and especially the ranting at referees, which a lot of times affects focus. And okay, we all understand that. But the condition really became a concern again after he was out for all camp, all of preseason, and he gained double-digit pounds during that stretch and came back, and it was a lot like J-Kid and Nico's first year, where the guy is so talented that he can go 29, 9, and 9, 28, 8, and 8, and play like crap. Like you guys watch the team every single game. You know what I'm talking about. And like earlier this season, you saw it in the efficiency. When he doesn't have his legs, he's not hitting his threes. You saw it in the way that he was completely out of gas in games and poor shot selection, poor decision making, just fatigue. You see it in especially on the defensive end. And people say, well, look at these ISO numbers. And I say, okay, let's watch Luka play defense, ISO defense, and tell me where everybody else on the floor is. Luka's ISO defensive stats are team defensive stats. But Luka really was struggling by his extraordinarily high standards early in the season. And then there was the wrist injury, which there was a wrist injury, but it was also a reason to shut him. Hey, look, there was a wrist injury. There wasn't he needs 11-day wrist injury. There's, what I'm saying? Just like year one of J Kid Nico, there was certainly ankle rolls there, but they shut him down to give him a chance to get in shape, to shed the weight. And there was a ton of frustration of, I can't believe we're doing this bleep again. Like, really, year four's right back where we were year one. A lot of frustration there. But honestly, he comes back from that, and he was first team All-NBA Luka for what was it, a 17-game stretch. I mean, dude had 45, 11 and 13 against the Warriors. The Mavericks win 14 of 17. Then that calf gets strained again on Christmas Day. And the reaction wasn't like sympathy for him or like, oh gosh, man, bad luck for us. It was frankly anger. Like, this is what happens when you don't take care of yourself. And next thing you know, he's having he's having coffee with Rob Pelinka.
He's getting that latte with Rob. All these things can be true about Luka, and it's still ridiculous that they traded him and gave up on him this early. But you referenced in the book that the Mavs kind of viewed Luka as a ticking time bomb, with injuries, lifestyle. What do you think? What is the bet from the Mavs? How do the Mavs think that Luka will be in 5 years?
Well, I mean, Nico's made it pretty clear. He thinks Luka's going to break down physically, and look, I went to college for 8 years. I'm not a doctor, but repeated calf strains with condition concerns, like, I get it's a reason to worry. And what could come next, like, there's legitimate reason to worry. And so they felt like the Supermax would be a terrible investment. Now, that's where I'm not following the logic, to be real honest. Because to me, the Supermax, if you want to trade this caliber of player, the Supermax is your best weapon. Because just like Damian Lillard, he had a one-team destination, right? He's going to Miami. He got the MI part right, but it's an L and not an A. Milwaukee's a hell of a long way from Miami, and he had no say. Why didn't he have any say? Because he was locked up long term. He was locked up for 4 years on a Supermax deal. So to me, the Supermax is if you feel like you got to trade Luka Doncic, okay, you got to maximize the value though. You got to maximize his return. And you can't do that if you feel like you have to keep this top secret. Like, ooh, man, we were proud. Nobody found out about this. It was just me and Rob Pelinka. Okay, but that's why Rob Pelinka was able to walk away with 2031 pick in his pocket, with 2030 swap in his pocket, Dalton Connect on the roster, whatever you want to say. You weren't able to maximize the value because you didn't have a bidding war. And if you live with Luka for the next year and a half, which, if you Supermax him this summer, then you can't trade him for a year. Maybe you go back to a finals or two. Maybe you don't. I don't know. If you still feel the same way, you've basically announced to the league, hey, we're trading Luka Doncic. You announce that at the end of the season, you get it done by training camp, and you might have, I would say would have, the biggest bidding war in NBA history.
Coming up, Tim has said that he's talked to about 100 executives across the league about the Luka Doncic trade. And there's only been about 8 of them that have said something even remotely positive about the Luka trade on the Dallas Mavericks behalf. And that's, I get wanting to get out of the Luka business. What do they mean by that? We'll tell you coming up.
We're going to get t-shirts made with that quote.
You've mentioned a couple times that the only kind of negative feedback you've gotten from talking to different execs and people with different teams is that I can understand wanting to be out of the Luka business.
Right.
What do you think that they meant by that? Is it all the conditioning and things that we've just kind of talked about?
Yeah, it's like the intel is what it is, and that was the intel going into the draft process, and it has been throughout the course of his career. And then, like, look, is there some maintenance involved with Luka in terms of, uh, moodiness, like the petulance? Yeah, of course there is. But is he the first superstar who's required maintenance in the NBA? Is he the highest maintenance superstar in the NBA today? I had somebody, I know you guys read that last chapter where somebody said, ask Miami if they would have rather dealt with Luka or Jimmy Butler, this season. And I did ask somebody pretty high up at Miami. He just started laughing. He's like, do you really need me to answer that? But so it's that stuff. Now, to be clear, and I've talked to dozens and dozens of GMs, executives, scouts throughout the league. This trade was great for me, my networking, because people are calling me, you know what I mean? And like when I see people that are like, people want to talk to me about it, I have not found one single person among those ranks who works for another franchise who told me, hey, this was a good move for the Mavericks. I don't know, it's 50 whatever to 0. I would say, let's just call it 50. I would say probably 42 were along the lines of, you just can't trade that kind of a generational talent at that age unless they've got the proverbial gun to your head, which is, the majority of the book is about trying to keep that proverbial gun, from being brandished, right? It's about the pressure on a franchise when you draft a prodigy, and that pressure is to keep them happy, to make them feel like they've got a chance to contend for championships, to feel like they don't need to look elsewhere. Maybe 8 of the 50, something like that, were like along the lines of, hey, I can get one to get out of the Luka business. And honestly, the defensive stuff is the other thing that comes up in those conversations. It's always followed by, but you have to maximize the return, and they didn't do that. And even if Nico was right about the body breakdown, and even if he were to suffer a significant injury over the next year and a half, I point to Kevin Durant. Guy had an Achilles in his 30s. He got maxed out, missed a full season, and then a bunch of time when he was in uniform for Brooklyn for a variety of injury issues. And they still got a massive haul from the Phoenix Suns. There are only so, like, 4 or 5 people walking the face of the earth who have this kind of basketball talent, and that might be a too high of a number, but whatever. Let's call it 4, right? Joker, Shea, Luka, Giannis. Those guys are always going to be coveted, no matter what kind of injury issues they might have had.
I want to talk about Jason Kidd for a second. They made it a point post-trade that Kidd found out at the 11th hour, and but they also at the same time are like, hey, we're in that Cleveland press conference, we're on the same page type of thing. There's been some debate like, how much did Kidd know? Did Kidd play a part? I think after reading especially some of the later chapters in the book, it was pretty clear that Kidd and Nico had been talking about this. What or at least talking about Luka's fit, all the stuff. What role did Jason Kidd play in this, and was it bigger than what was led on?
Well, what I can say with certainty is that Jason Kidd was very frustrated with Luka for all the reasons that we've discussed. I can't sit here and tell you that Jason Kidd was involved in the actual trade discussions. I can't. He says he found out the 11th hour. I can't prove otherwise on that. Jason Kidd also said that he was just the guy, executing the front office's plan on the tank. Jake Kidd has a voice. That I can say. Now, but I honestly, I can't tell you when Nico went to him as far as like, hey, we've got these talks with the Lakers. We're this looking like a Luka trade's a real possibility. I don't know what that conversation was between them. They say it happened at the 11th hour. I can assure you they'd had plenty of conversations about what they felt like were real problems in terms of getting Luka where they wanted him to be.
But it's probably safe to say that when Nico made this trade, he probably knew that Kidd wasn't going to be that upset about it.
I certainly don't think that Jason Kidd was threatening to break his hand pounding the table against it. And listen, man, like Anthony Davis is not only Nico's guy, he's Jay Kidd's guy. You know, he's like Jay Kidd won a championship with him in the bubble with the Lakers. So again, I can't sit here and tell you with certainty things that I don't know with certainty, but what I do know is that Jay Kidd definitely had been extremely frustrated with Luka this fall.
In the book, there's a quote from Nico, and by the way, we mentioned the book. We got our copy in December, so this is not like a added after the fact thing. In the book, you talk about that Nico had a quote talking about he wanted to change the culture after being first hired with the Mavericks. Mm-hmm. How did Luka become not part of that culture at a certain point?
Man, there's a lot there. And I reported in August 2023 that the Mavericks had reassigned Casey Smith, which is a polite way of saying he got fired, but they had to pay out the final year of his contract. And honestly, that's not in the original copy of the book because I thought it was going to be I reported that and I was like, okay, this is going to be a thing, but let's see how it develops. And then they went to the final. So it's like, okay, well, it's a thing. And it damn sure became a thing this year. They also, after the finals, fired Jeremy Holsapple, who's their strength coach. And for I don't know if everybody, I know you guys have like hardcore Mavs fans. I'm not sure if everybody knows who Casey Smith is.
They do.
Okay. Jeremy Holsapple and then Casey Spangler, who's their manual therapist, the massage therapist. These are all people who weren't just like good at their jobs and like cool with Luka. These are people who played massive roles in this guy's cultural transition from a European teenager to not just America, but to the NBA. These are people who were with the Mavericks well before Luka got there, had been with him his whole time. Scott, right after Casey Smith, and there was, it was a domino effect. Like Casey got banished, and Dirk said, "Hey, Scooter, you want to come work with me?"
Yeah.
I mean, Casey was such a critical part of the fabric of the franchise. So was Scott Tomlin. These are like, go back to the 06 finals when Dirk is just, emotionally devastated in the wake of losing to the Miami Heat and seeing the Heat celebrate on his court. It's Casey, Scott Tomlin, and Dirk in the locker room until the sun came up the next day. And they were that same kind of support group for Luka, and Holsapple and Spangler. And so you're firing these people, Luka's guys, people that Luka not just likes, but he trusts, he respects. And you're replacing them with Nico's guys. And yeah, there's going to be tension there. And so definitely that stuff played a part. And was like, were there times when Luka was defiant from Nico's perspective? Yeah. Like for example, when he's got the wrist thing and they're like, "Hey, we want you to be part of, like mentally engaged in practice, come be part of it." And he's like, "No, I'm gonna go work with my guys on the other side of the gym." Well, they felt like that was defiance. But again, as somebody told me in that final chapter, Luka's people, his body team, are trying to protect a player that you alienated, and they definitely alienated Luka. And then this is stuff I found out about recently, but it's so it's not in the chapter. But like Luka didn't go on that last road trip. I think it was a 5-game road trip when he ended up getting traded midway through, and there was tension there. And the Mavericks, Nico wanted him on the road. Like, hey, we got a 5-game road trip. The plan was for him to come back February 8th. We need you with the team. We need you ramping up. And Luka's people, this wasn't like, there wasn't direct communication. There wasn't much communication between Luka and Nico this year. So it's, Luka's people talking to Nico or talking to people at Mavericks. They said, no, we're ramping up at home. Like, why would he go on the road where maybe you can get the gym for an hour after shoot around? You're scrambling to find all like the medical stuff that you need. When we have the practice facility, like we're doing 2-a-days. He's doing morning workouts. He's doing night workouts. There's the weight room. There's all like the cold tub and all like the medical technologies. Like, why he's ramping up here because that's where it's best for him. And so that was like a conflict. But honestly, by that point, this thing had obviously gotten pretty far down the road anyway in terms of the trade talks.
So much stuff to get into with Tim McMahon. The book has just so many different insights in it across the span of Luka's career and then even now after the trade and all that. So we'll do one more thing where we'll do the rest of this full conversation on there. So check back. Thanks for subscribing to Locked On Mavs. Follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, all over social media. Locked On Daily is the newsletter link. You can get our newsletter every single day. Guys, thanks so much for listening to Locked On Mavs.
Peace out.
Boom.